I was just thinking about our friend from Alaska, and one of his favorite things is fish or cut bait. We're coming to that point, I think, and so we're going to have to make some decisions here and put it in place. Mr. Chairman, you were speaking earlier of the NDAA, and I believe that the $1 billion from the Senate is in the NDAA. Is that correct? I think that's correct. Pardon? Senate Appropriation Bill. And Mr. O'Rourke just described different ways we could come to a conclusion here and set the policy in place. It's very clear to me that the administration is not in a position to make a definitive policy statement. They're kind of biding their time with $150 million and a various, and then laying out some strategy into the future. And that's really a result of Congress not willing to appropriate money. So I think in the next 3 months, as we get the information on the Polar Sea and whether it can be refurbished or not, as we deal with the appropriation as well as the NDAA, that we are in a place where we can make a decisive decision with regard to the future of the icebreakers. My own preference here is to use the NDAA and or the appropriation or both to lay out a block buy for at least 2, well, let me just say for 2 new icebreakers to be built in the next 5 to 7 years. I notice, Mr. O'Rourke, you laid out a projection of expenditures over the next 7 years for 1 icebreaker. I would ask the Admiral Michel to lay out a projection for a block buy 2 icebreakers over the next 7 to 8 years, and also how that time frame can be compressed to reduce the gap that everybody has talked about, and that apparently is a very real gap in the ability to operate in the Arctic and Antarctic. So I think we need to be very precise here. And Mr. Chairman, I would encourage you and your leadership role in this to undertake a process so that when the NDAA is completed, the conference committee presumably is going to get underway while we are in recess, that we take up this issue, we build into that NDAA conference committee and the appropriation a specific plan. My recommendation, once again, is a block buy 2 icebreakers over the next 7 to 8 years, and in the next month, a careful analysis by this committee as to whether we can refurbish the Polar Sea to address the gap issue and what it might might be available to us beyond. Also, it seems to me that there are the other 5 issues with regard to the Arctic and the Antarctic. The communication strategy, Admiral, I appreciate the communication, that is the ship itself being communication. I think, however, that is going to be inadequate. Certainly the Navy issue is part of this. There are submarines, both ours and others, that'll be operating in the area. So I think the communication issue needs to be fully vetted and brought to our attention so that if it is in our I know both the chairman and I are on the House Armed Services Committee, and certainly that'll be a piece of that puzzle also. And domain awareness and communications, I think, are probably one and the same. Infrastructure, the Army Corps of Engineers. What are their, and Admiral, if you could brief us on the infrastructure issue which has been raised. Does us little good to have a heavy icebreaker in the Arctic with no fuel and no ability to get fuel except to return to Seattle. And then finally, the training mission, which was part of your testimony, and we'll go into that in more detail later. Those are the 5 areas. I think we must be prepared as a committee to make a decision and get on with it, and frankly, commit the United States to spending the money to get the job done. You know, we've got 2-year time frame for our contracts, or every 2 years, but I think we ought to commit the future Congress. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Sanford is recognized, as long as he doesn't advocate buying Russian icebreakers.